When it comes to living life, you're not doing it right unless you're getting annoyed. In fact, when I think back to the happiest, most carefree days of my life, I think of what a loser I was. Being bothered by things is popular for a reason, folks, so get on board. Complaining about your job to whoever will listen, judging people for things that have nothing to do with you, a bread bag clip breaking on you, whatever it takes, get bothered. This is what living the good life looks like, folks. But as tempting as a life full of anguish and frustration might be, some of you might still think your younger, happier self had things right. Trouble is, your younger self didn't have to track down some geezer's lost goat in Witcher 3, now did they? Unless, of course, you're a younger gamer, in which case, welcome to the retro party. That said, the first trend that drives me nuts in gaming is unexciting cookie-cutter side quests that seem to be stuffed into the game for no reason other than as filler. Although actually the Geezer's Goat mission might have been mandatory, I can't remember. In any case, uninspired side content has been getting jammed into games at an alarming rate for far too long now. This actually goes hand in hand with the trend of games being expected to be really long, especially big budget AAA releases. I would trade 100 uninspired side quests for just one more single well-crafted mission any day of the week. I mean, what happened to quality over quantity? I thought that was one of those universally agreed upon things, like thinking red delicious apples are gross. And why does every big budget game have to be so long? I hear people complain about how big their backlogs are all the time, and not just retro gamers who are dealing with, potentially playing every game ever made. Players who mostly just play modern games complain about backlogs as well. I understand that it's a value thing. You want to feel like you can get a certain amount of gameplay out of each dollar that you spend, but it needs to be meaningful gameplay, not hollow gameplay. And here's what I've always thought. If a game is made to be enjoyable enough, then you'd actually have the desire to replay it and get more value out of it that way. I mean, you love video games, don't you? Think of a video game like the love of your life. It's ideal to find one you'll love forever. My copy of Contra had me promise I'd never put it in a home. A big reason why many of us have no desire to replay certain longer games is because sure, there might have been some enjoyable parts and we liked the game overall, maybe, but there's less fun parts of the game that contribute to its length that make the idea of playing all the way through it again feel like a slog, maybe even a punishment. Sure, I've replayed through Spider-Man, but try getting me to play all the way through Red Dead Redemption 2 again and you'd sooner find me faking my own death. I know exactly how I'd pull it off, too. The foundation of video games was built upon creating games that would be enjoyable to play again. You ever see somebody cross Pong off their backlog? This is a big part of the appeal of older games, or games inspired by older games, the replayability. So many games that we can just pop in time and again because they're dense with good stuff. Think about it, whether it's listening to music, watching a movie, visiting somewhere, or whatever it may be, the ultimate compliment is to want to experience something again. I flatter the heck out of my nanners. Now, you're going to notice that a lot of the trends that bother me are all connected, as the next one is open world games. Once upon a time, an open world game was considered very novel. Now they're very common, and many would tell you oversaturated. That's not to say they can't still be good, but do we really need so many? To me, it feels like it comes from the expectation to make games longer, in which case, making an open world is the easiest way to make a game longer. I mean, if you can have a player spend hours just traveling across passing through its world, well hey, you've got yourself a much longer game from that alone. Can we count bathroom breaks too? A lot of times the introductions to games can be long as well. There's certain games where if I added up all the time I spent getting through the opening cinematics and tutorial section that often explain how to do every little thing with blocks of text that constantly interrupt the game, it would be equivalent to playing through an entire Sega Genesis game, maybe even two, or Altered Beast 30 times. Now, it should be pointed out that some games handle traversal better than others. For example, I've always felt Spider-Man lends itself very naturally to fun traversal due to how enjoyable it is to swing your way around New York City, to the point I almost never use the fast travel feature in the game. That said, other games aren't as fun to travel through, and there's one mode of transportation in particular that's become a trend that I take issue with. Horses. A lot of games with horses. For as much as horses are used in games, I sure don't hear a lot from people about how much fun they're having with the horses. In Tears of the Kingdom, I almost avoided using horses entirely thanks to other, far more fun ways of getting around in the game. Typically, the best thing I ever hear about riding horses in games is about how it's not bad, as opposed to, bad. And don't get me wrong, I love horses, always have. Just can't say when I was a kid that I dreamt of the days when I could spend hours riding them in video games. And believe me, I dreamt for some pretty weird stuff as a kid. In any case, we're talking about video games here, where one of the biggest advantages is not having to follow the rules of real life. We can do better than horses. I want to double back to my critique of open world games in general though, which, again, I'll reiterate, can be good games. I just hate that it comes at the expense of stigmatizing more linear games. The metaphor I like to use is books. No author has ever been criticized for choosing to write a book that was designed to be read in a linear, from start to finish fashion. In fact, it would almost be laughable for any highly respected, highly talented author to not write a book in such a fashion. Not gonna see these books winning a Pulitzer Prize. You can trust a great writer to craft the best experience possible for you, and I find myself trusting talented game developers in much the same way, with full control. When a game is more open-ended, the developer can only guess what you might do and has less control over what you will experience. Not to mention, by having to account for so many more different possibilities, quality could suffer, and in any case, development time can increase. Speaking of which, games take way too long to make. Not to mention, larger games are also the ones that tend to be released with bugs and technical issues. I don't fault the speed or effort at which development teams are working on games though. I fault the philosophy that the games have to be so massive to begin with, and games seem to just keep trying to outdo each other too. It's going to get to the point where a game will be announced and you'll legitimately wonder if you'll still be alive or not when it comes out. Alright, next trend of mine that I hate. So many video game characters are designed to look like generic human people. Sure, they might be interesting because of their story or dialogue, but I'm talking about the actual design of how they look. Back in the day, yep, I've got my back in my day pants back on, video games would have such interesting characters, colorful characters, and sure, a lot of that has to do with the fact that Japanese game development was a lot more prominent back then, with Western development being more prominent now, another trend I'm not as big on, but Japanese culture leaned more towards colorful, eccentric characters, and gosh darn it, that's what I like. I don't want my video game characters to look like the guy who rung up my groceries. No offense, Daryl, our conversation on seasonal baked goods really did mean the world to me. Of course, there's a lot of the annoying business decision related trends we can pretty much all agree agree on that suck too. Basically, locking content behind a price you have to pay in any sort of dirty dog kind of way. I don't think it's asking too much for a game to feel complete when you buy it. By the way, sometimes people will point to Sonic 3 as the one example of an older incomplete game requiring Sonic and Knuckles, but I don't agree with that. Sonic 3 and Sonic & Knuckles each feel like their own substantial Sega Genesis game. Combining them just turns them into one mega game. When it comes to DLC and extra content in modern games, one of the biggest things that annoys me are cosmetic items you pay for. Seems like they're trying to take advantage of people who have some sort of compulsion issue. If you're an older gamer, you remember the days when little doodads and diddly bobs could be unlocked by doing various things within the game. You know, earning them by playing the game. And a lot of times it was really fun to try to figure out how to unlock these things. In any case, it was just nice to know that a game had everything you needed when you bought it. Respawn points being too close to each other in games really drives me nuts too. At first, it might seem like a nice thing, you know, a convenience for the player, but if there's not much of a penalty for dying or failing, then what's the point of dying or failing in the first place? It's almost like just having an invincibility cheat. Beating these large AAA games is often more about having enough time to get through it, not how good at the game you are, which is fine for some games to be that way, but let's just call it what it is. Something else I've talked about before is the de-emphasis of local multiplayer in favor of online multiplayer, which, don't get me wrong, can also be fun. And it makes sense that it happened, as online multiplayer is just far more convenient and realistic compared to the challenge of getting a group of your friends and family all together in one room. But while this example is understandable, I still think it's part of a larger problem of how decisions are made with a lens of business first. The video game market has grown so large, and a lot of the decisions made seem like they're only concerned with the bottom line as it pertains to money made. It can feel like it's less about trying to make something fun and more about what they can get away with in order to maximize profits. Sometimes it seems like creativity is mostly up to indie devs, and Nintendo is the only major company still willing to go out on a limb. You think Sony would ever make a Wii U? Oh, I stand corrected. But there you have it, stuff that ruffles my feathers. Would love to hear what you think of the points I made, as well as which points you would add. And don't any of you dare come away from this thinking that I hate modern games or horses. It's all about moderation. But with that, leave a comment down below, and I will see ya in the next video.
He's the retro bird, yeah, and he's talking about video games. He's the retro bird, oh yes, and he hopes that you liked what he had to say.